Hey everyone, welcome back. I am delighted to have Deborah White with us today. It is a pleasure to have her on here. I'm going to go ahead and get started by just introducing Deborah White properly and tell you guys a little bit about what she's working on and who she is. So Deborah has been passionately working for the past 3 years to end human trafficking of migrant children at the border. She has partnered with America's Future, a group established in 1946 that is dedicated to American values and ideals, to spreading the word and getting Americans to take action with their Stop the Shame campaign and the Vote Yay for CRA movement. And for those of you that don't know, CRA is an acronym for Congressional Review Act. Yay for CRA seeks to bring back to Congress the rule change that HHS codified, which makes it easier and faster to process these children and making them more vulnerable to human trafficking. Deborah collaborates with America's Future to protect the nation's constitutional republic, to promote strong American families, to revitalize the role of faith in our society, to advance the virtues of free market capitalism, and to reestablish our founding fathers' framework that America is one nation, under God, of the people, for the people, and by the people. Deborah, thank you for being on the show. It is a pleasure to have you on. How are you doing?
Hi, Raymond. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for doing the interview. And I'm doing great. Just coming off of a couple weeks of giving my Senate testimony. And so it's been really hectic, but in a good way, right? So we're glad that it's getting some attention. And I'm just really glad to be here. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for reference, just for our listeners, where are you located? You're in Virginia, correct?
Yes, I'm in Virginia. And I also want to make a disclaimer because sometimes I forget to do this. So I do work for a federal agency, but my views and opinions do not represent that of the federal agency that I work for. So I just wanted to say that up front.
Sure.
That's the Washington, D.C. Statements that we have to make in this area.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Deborah, if you don't mind, I'd like to start off with a little bit about, who you are, your early childhood, right? I think it's always great for our listeners to connect with you, right? To know who you are. Could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what that was like?
Yeah, sure. So I am a Hispanic American. I was actually born in Argentina. I came here when I was 2 years old. My father, he volunteered for during Vietnam era and got his citizenship that way. And so anyhow, so those are my very early years. So I'm a native Spanish speaker. And I grew up in the DMV, so that's the DC, Maryland, Virginia area most of my life. Until married my husband, and we did a little bit of traveling with the military, but back in my home base area of the district, Washington, D.C. area.
Nice, nice. And you said you work for a federal agency. Which agency do you currently work for?
Yeah, it's a GSA, General Services Administration. They're a wonderful agency. Have nothing negative to say about them whatsoever. The thing that we're going to talk about today is really having to do with a detail assignment, meaning I was temporarily on loan to an organization or an agency called Health and Human Services. But GSA has nothing to do with the issues that are happening today.
Okay.
With regard to human trafficking.
Right. And we'll jump into that in here in just a moment. And then one question I always like to ask our guests, right? It's just because I think it's helpful because those are very formative years. And then we may have some younger viewers, right? So I'd like to ask you, had we met you back in high school, had one of our listeners, right, known you and met you during high school, who were you then? Who was Deborah?
Yeah, that I'm so glad that's not the Deborah of today, right? I would say that I was a very good student actually, but I was very what do you call it? Free spirit, free spirit kind of person. But I would say that what formed me really was my faith in Jesus Christ. That's really what formed who I am today, and I'm so grateful for that. So I grew up, going to church and just formed by ideals of like justice and integrity. That's really important to me. And I think that's why that's what I grew up with that. And that's what fueled me to become the person that I am today. But I would say, like, looking back on, my high school days, I was raised by a single mother. My father passed away when I was 9 years old. So it was very difficult. It caused me to grow up faster, help take care of my brother, who's a little bit younger than me. But I think all of those experiences formed me into the person that I am today. So I'm very grateful. I don't regret any experience that I've had. I'm just really thankful because it molded me into the person that I am today. And I would say that was due in part to God himself, of course, and my mother, who instilled values and ethics and decency into me as a young child.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that answer. That's
Yeah.
You're very driven, right? You were just before the Senate. I'm curious, where does that drive come from? And what is your jet fuel? What is it that you're chasing? Or what is it that you're running from?
Yeah. So my jet fuel, the way you put it, I like that. It's really, I love people, and children, of course, matter to me. So what fuels me is justice and integrity and accountability and honesty. All of those characteristics that really, like, at the root, they come from your faith. They come from, God, right? We don't have anything good without God. And so that's really, I think that's my fuel, is I feel like I'm on mission, to, to help bring justice, where there's injustice, to shed light where there's darkness. And that's what fuels me to keep going, come what may, pay whatever price you have to. That's what continues to fuel me, is doing the right thing.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And that's a perfect transition, right? So for the past 3 years, you've been working on a movement, right, that we talked about just a moment ago, called Stop the Shame, Yay for CRA. Can you tell us a little bit more about this endeavor, this movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So myself and my counterpart, Tara Rodas, who were in this fight, we witnessed some things, witnessed some human trafficking actually happening, sadly, through our government system. And we partnered with America's Future because they were the one agency, organization that was willing to do something about it, not just hear about it, but they felt like they had the power to go ahead and amplify this message. And so that's who America's Future is. They stand for American values and the rights of the people. And so they've been a fantastic partner. So if you go to americasfuture.net, you'll see the Stop the Shame campaign. And we're basically asking every American to go on there and very easily on a map find your senators and representatives and be able to click there and to call them and to write them to say that we want you to vote yay for CRA. And what that is, CRA, as you talked about earlier, is the Congressional Review Act that would protect these children. So we want the Senate to invoke this this Congressional Review Act to take this law that was codified by Health and Human Services to process these children quicker and faster, and making them more vulnerable and more open to exploitation. So they codified these rules in July in the Federal Register. That I know that may be foreign to a lot of people, but there's a process where an agency can go in and kind of do an administrative rule change, which basically codifies whatever they want into law, as long as they post it on the Federal Register for 90 days before they codify it, right? And that's what they did. And in July, they created a whole bunch of processes and procedures that would make it less vetting for the sponsor, easier and faster to process the children out, further compartmentalizes a process that is already compartmentalized. So, one side of the organization doesn't know what the other is doing. I mean, even in the room, like in my experience on site there in California, when I was helping to process these children, transportation didn't know what medical was doing. Medical didn't know what case management was doing. So this invoking this CRA, this Congressional Review Act, will force the rules to come back to the Congress for a vote of the will of the people. Okay.
And just out of curiosity, right? And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but what led to them doing this, right? What triggered them wanting to go through this process of expediting, the codification of new rules and regulations and processes?
Right. Well, I couldn't say definitively, but what I can say is that as this influx of children that came in 2021, right when Biden took office, he, signed 94 executive orders, many of those which made it easier for migrants to cross the border into the country. And I'm a migrant. I am not against migration, legal migration, obviously. But what he did was basically allow this huge influx of migrants to come into the country illegally, to the point where, border patrol had no recourse but to process these people and let them into the country. That's never been done before, not to the extent that we're seeing in 2021, 22, 23, and ongoing. And so, this basically it created a vulnerability for these children coming into the country. And so why are they doing this? That's a great question, Raymond. Why would you make it easier and faster to process these children other than just dealing with, the sheer speed? It's a money-making machine, right? For these contractors, for these NGOs, this is a money-making machine, right? So they don't want to stop this. I don't see any reason for Health and Human Services to want to stop this. They want to continue funding their program. Bureaucrats don't want their programs to be defunded by Congress. We'd love for Congress to defund this program because it is reckless abandon. It's completely reckless what they're doing with the lives of these little children. And it's a shame. It's a stain on our nation, and we cannot stand for it. And that's why we're asking for everyone, to vote yay for CRA so that we can stop this.
Right. One of the quotes that I found within the America's Future website was where they talked about that HHS was knowingly funneling unaccompanied children to a sponsored with MS-13 gang ties. I'm curious, how did such an egregious mistake like this take place, right? Because I mean, MS-13, as if I'm not mistaken, was designated a terrorist group some years back, right? Many years back. So,
yes.
So when you say ties, I'm curious I don't know if you know the answer to this, but what do you mean by ties? I mean, was it a former member, or was it somebody that knew somebody, or was it just a distant relative of somebody that maybe was incarcerated for being? I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, so that was my my counterpart, Tara Rodas. That was the case that she handled, because I was leaving off of the site when this first came about. This was in September. So I just want to clarify that it is not a mistake. Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, actively knew and was warned by Tara. There's an evidence reel on Senator Grassley's site that will show you some of the evidence that has been provided thus far. And it's across the top on the emails. Do not release, active MS-13 gang member, requesting sponsorship of children, 2 children, as a matter of fact. And they did get both children. And so, to my knowledge from the case, yes, those were active MS-13 gang members that had a huge criminal history in country in El Salvador. The site knew, and they still released the children. And there was overwhelming evidence that was provided to them beforehand, and they could have stopped it, and they didn't. They released the child anyhow. Yes.
Right.
How is this happening? I mean, it continually happens, right? There's a DHS whistleblower. His name is Aaron Stevenson, and he's been in the media as well, releasing basically blowing the whistle that Department of Homeland Security also knew about these criminals that were on the terrorist watch list, and they were receiving children. So it's not by accident. They know it's happening.
Yeah, and just for the sake of some of our viewers, I'd love to ask some probing questions. So were these children that they were receiving, were these children that were not related to them, and then they were, the threat, right, the real threat that they could be trafficking these children and exploiting them, or were these children that were sent to them and it was their children, or their nieces or nephews, or do you know that which of the two it was?
Yeah, so a lot of the children are in what's called a category 3. So there's different categories. So a category 1 child would be a child that is going to a parent. A category 2, there's 2A, 2B. So 2A is a very not the parent or guardian, but a close relative, like a brother or sister relationship. Then
Right.
a category 2B could be like a cousin, and then category 3 would be a distant relative or just a quote unquote social relationship. tie to the child. Category 4 means they had no sponsor. And so we didn't have too many of those, but I think those category 4, where the child got here and said that they had no one to go to.
And Deborah, out of those, right, you explained to us this categorization, right, of the children, those children that were being sent to, people that had ties to MS-13, what categories were those children designated as?
Yeah, so in that particular case, that was Tara's case, but I do believe those were claiming to be a category 1, like a parent, or it could have been a category 2. There was some kind of relationship that they could prove, I believe, at least on one of the children. But the problem is that we receive a lot of fake documents. That's the issue. So even if they're claiming to be a category 1, right, meaning a parent-child relationship, oftentimes, these people are giving us fake birth certificates for these children. They're real, legitimate birth certificates, but they may not belong to the child, that you see in front of you that you're interviewing. And so that's the problem, is that, we never saw these sponsors face to face. So that was a major issue. The way that we were contacting the official, communication was happening through an app called WhatsApp. If you can imagine, the government is literally communicating with these quote unquote sponsors through WhatsApp, and you never see them face to face. We have the ability to, right? Because you can just turn on the camera, but they don't do that. They do not allow you to turn on the camera, saying that, it's for at least at the site I was at, for the privacy of, there were no private, booth areas where we could just have the one-on-one video chat. So they did not allow us to turn on the video feature on WhatsApp. You literally got a copy of their, their documents, and they said, yep, that's me. You can't verify it's them because you don't see their face. But they would send those documents. And then again, the birth certificates of the children that were coming through, there's no photo on that. You can't verify that birth certificate actually belongs to that child. And that was okay. That's what you had to accept and process. And sometimes when the documents looked fake, and we had brought it up at the site, these documents look fake, right? They look like they've been altered. A Guatemalan consular ID or something, right? We were still told to take it. We were told that we were not fake ID experts. That was not our job. Our job was not to question the sponsor. Our job was to reunify the child with the sponsor. So again, potential trafficking situations were running rampant. And we know that because when they did the 30-day wellness calls, which means, you call a child, you verify that they got to their sponsor, that they're doing okay, more than 50% of those phone calls do not get picked up. I know that they've reported in the New York Times that 85,000 children are missing. It's way higher than that. It's way higher than that. And the phone calls that were able to be verified by the case managers, you don't even know if you're talking to the same child that you were interviewing at the site. They could, this trafficker person, whoever sponsor, they could put their own kid on the phone, to say, hi, yeah, I'm doing well, I'm okay. Because when the case managers were not able to get a hold of these children when they were doing these 30-day calls, they started freaking out, right? Because some of the responses for the ones that did get a hold of the sponsor would say things like, oh, I don't have the child anymore. I was told to pick them up from the airport. I gave them to somebody else. Well, who'd you give them to? I don't know. The guy that said that he was the uncle. I was just pretending to be an uncle or whatever. They wouldn't say I'm pretending, but they were like, I don't know. I was just in charge of picking him up. And then I gave him to the kid's other uncle, something like that. And you couldn't get a hold of the child. But they don't go and prosecute these people. They don't go and say, okay, call 911, can't find the child. They don't do that. They just say, okay, next call. And so as the case managers that was making these phone calls started freaking out, we had a meeting in the command center one morning and we were like, look, they can't get a hold of these kids, and they were like, well, don't worry, because, we have transferred the responsibility of that function to the headquarters level, or headquarters, told us that we have to give them that function. And so we're like, well, how can you do that at the national level, at the national call center, when these people don't know these children? They don't know who's going to be answering and saying, yeah, the kid's fine, but they took that away because, again, everyone was freaking out at the site because many of them could not locate the children after they left the site.
Right. And that's a very real concern. And human trafficking has become an even more important issue in recent years, right? There's a movie that recently came out that was widely distributed, very powerful.
Sound of Freedom.
Right, right.
Yes, yes.
And I'm wondering, and I just ask once again, just because, I have to ask these types of questions, right? Just to, so definitely concerning, some of the examples you gave, have there been any children at all that have been later found or have been later identified within a, human trafficking, ring that was busted, is there any of that, or is it just like that concern that we can't get a hold of them, phones not being picked up? Is just wondering if there's any
Yeah,
actual link
there
to.
are several. Yeah, there. I mean, there. I haven't even kept up with how many, but there are several busts of human trafficking rings that have been busted in Austin, in the middle of the country. I can't remember if it was South Dakota or North Dakota, somewhere around there, or Nebraska. I think it was Nebraska. So there have been several trafficking rings that have been busted, and we know that many of the children came, from the undocumented children's program. And so, yes, that has happened. There are active investigations that are going on right now that I can't dive into, obviously, because I can't tell you like what city, state, just because it's actively ongoing. But yes, we know that Homeland Security investigations, they're doing a great job about going out there and finding, potentially finding these children. So yes, we just can't confirm anything just because the investigation is still active and ongoing. And they
Yeah.
don't, quite frankly, they don't update me. They don't give me an update as to what's happening on those.
Right. No, and that's powerful. I'm glad you pointed that out, right? Because somebody could be watching us, right, listening to us, and they could be skeptical and go, well, these are children from poor towns, from poor countries. So of course you're not going to be able to get a hold of them if you call, because chances are a lot of them don't have phones, right? Or
Right.
or for whatever reason, right? There's any number of reasons why they may not pick up, or the person that's on record or that's on file picked up the child may not know where the child is now, right? If it was a distant relative, any number of possibilities. But if you're saying that there's been multiple, sting operations, right, where they busted these
Yep.
human trafficking rings, and they've identified some of the children that were being trafficked as children that were part of the program, right, where they were released, to individuals here
Yes.
in the U.S. So that's powerful.
Yes.
That's
Yes. And where they're finding them in slaughterhouses, agriculture farms, meat packing plants, those kind of places. A lot of them are working overnight shifts. So Department of Labor, I believe, is catching them as well. But Hannah Dreyer, who works for the New York Times, I believe, she's written a couple of articles, Pulitzer Prize winning articles about, where they're locating these children, like where they're finding them, the factories and meat packing plants and in the farms, agriculture, all of that. And it's not news. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. I remember when I was on the site in 2021, I found, congressional hearings that were happening in, 2015. So they know about this. Congress continues to fund them, unfortunately.
By chance, do you know the age range of these children that are being found at these factories working, and these?
Yeah, yeah. So some as young as 13, but the typical age is 15 to 17. And that's typically what we saw coming through the facility. So where I was at in Pomona, California, that we had kids as young as 5 years old and up till 17 years old. But the bulk majority of the kids were between 15 to 17 years old.
That were working at these factories and fields and different things like that. Okay,
Right.
cool. And then if we could just shift gears just a little bit, Deborah. The CRA, right? This is a mechanism that and please correct me if I'm mistaken, right? Because you're the expert here, but it's a mechanism to try to hold government accountable in one fashion, right? In one form. How successful
Yes.
has that mechanism been, generally speaking, right? In the past, have you guys have there been successes using that mechanism to hold government accountable?
Yeah, the CRA specifically, that doesn't get invoked too often. And so that's why we really need the support of the American people, and to put pressure, on Congress to do this. But yes, there's thousands of rules that get codified in the Federal Register. And so that's how government, the administrative state, right? They circumvent the will of the people and congressional rule by, posting it and then codifying these rules. I really can't speak to how effective it is, the CRA mechanism itself. But we've got to do everything we possibly can to give these children a fighting chance, and that's the only chance that they're going to have is if we bring these rules back, for a congressional vote. Because I can guarantee you that, well, I can't guarantee you, but I'm sure that the will of the people, putting pressure on Congress, will force them to have to do this. And Senator Grassley's office, is working very hard to try to get this movement off the ground so that it can come to Congress for a vote. It is hard to hold the bureaucrats accountable, but we have to try. We have to keep moving forward, and this is the only mechanism that we have to do that.
Yeah, and that's, I love that you made that statement, because that leads into my second question, that as far as holding bureaucrats accountable, and them and the institutions, right, that they represent within government, in addition to the CRA, right, just in general, can you speak to that? What's been your experience with holding government accountable for abuses of power or government overreach, and different aspects, different things like that?
Yeah, unfortunately, government accountability is very difficult, right? We have the Office of Inspector General, that can do that does the oversight, but that typically happens when something very wrong has already occurred, and it doesn't always result in the agency taking action on the recommendations that the Office of Inspector General, those recommendations that they have made, right? And sometimes there's not follow-up to ensure that they have made the changes that the Inspector General, has recommended. So that's the problem, right? The other problem is that the Office of Inspector General only has access to the data that an agency is cooperative with and is willing to give them. That is a major issue here because Health and Human Services pushes back on complying in providing the data. They will not release the data. So there's an official government system of record, which is called the UAC portal. That's the Unaccompanied Alien Children portal. I think they were trying to change the name to UC portal. So it might just be, undocumented children's portal, something like that. But anyhow, the UAC portal is the government's official system of record. The Office of Inspector General does not have access to that. There's really no meaningful investigation that can happen unless they have full access to those records. And at current time, the Health and Human Services does not provide them full access to that. They will provide piecemeal records, right? So it's very hard to paint a full picture and get a full understanding of the criminal behavior that's really happening within the portal, right, within this agency. So Health and Human Services ends up being accountable to Health and Human Services. They are accountable to no one, and they really try to gag their employees, put a gag order on them so that they don't comply. And they do that by ensuring that when whistleblowers from Health and Human Services speak up, they get fired. They'll find a reason to fire them.
So who's responsible for ensuring that, or giving HHS that type of power where they don't have to provide records, right? Provide full disclosure, full transparency to the Office of Inspector, General. I mean, whose fault is that? Who set up that structure? Who gave them that kind of authority?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm going to say that this goes all the way to the top because working for the executive branch, we are accountable directly to the president. So the heads of these agencies, the administrators over these agencies, they report directly to the president, right? And so that stems from the top, right? If no one is forcing them to be accountable, then that's why they feel like they have this unlimited power and they don't have to comply with federal law enforcement or the Inspector General. They'll paint a picture that they're complying, but their way of complying is by, again, piecemealing information and giving it over, to the Inspector General and not necessarily providing them direct access to the portal where they could, review the documents for themselves.
So does that mean that in theory, a new president could come in, issue an executive order forcing them to be fully transparent?
Yes. Yes.
Why hasn't that happened yet?
That's a good question. That's a good question, but it seems like this administration, they undid every policy that was working. And I don't want to make it political, but that is essentially what's happened. Policy is what can make or break a program, right? And for right now, the dollars keep flowing. Health and Human Services has the second or maybe third largest budget in the United States of America, right after the Department of Defense.
Okay.
I mean, that's staggering. That's staggering. So they are getting a whole lot of money to continue to do these programs, horribly, I might add. But they continue to be funded. And so it's not going to stop, right, until, some executive order is issued that says, that they have to comply, because right now they don't feel that they have to, and I'm sure that they're breaking, laws by doing that, but no one is holding them accountable.
So just you said, so this administration has not done anything to try to, to fix this issue, but the HHS, they've been around for a long time, right?
Yes.
Do you know how long they've been around? I'm guessing
I don't.
way back. So and I ask these questions because I am familiar with the FOIA, right? The Freedom of Information Act. Here in Utah, it's called the Grandma Statute, and I'm more familiar with the state one here in Utah, and I see these types of things where there's all this stuff that there's all these organizations or sub organizations, right? Government entities that have all this protection, where they have all this information that's privileged and protected, and there's no way to get it. And some of it makes sense, but some of it does not, right? And it's built into the structure. I don't think it's by accident. I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, there's obviously something that somebody in some of these cases, right? Like I said, sometimes it's reasonable, but in some of these cases, there's something that's they're trying to keep that from the public, right? So that people don't see this. So with HHS, right? Like, my question about, how long they've been around. Well, my guess is that their lack of transparency, right? And the authority that they have to be able to do that with impunity has been the case for a very long time, decades, maybe longer, right? So it's interesting, right? It's interesting to see that, and I wonder what the rationale behind that is, because I don't know if they have top secret confidential information that absolutely must be protected.
They don't.
So
yeah, they don't. They don't,
back
Raymond.
decades of
The influx has gotten so terrible the past few years, though, that they can't properly process. There's no vetting, right? There's no way to properly vet. They're going to say that they do properly vet. There's no way to properly vet. You never see these people face to face. This is system by design. They just want to, get the kids in, get the kids out. The mantra was 10 to 14 days. If you had the kids longer than 20 days, they would create what's called a strike team. Contractor would put together, those case managers that they felt could get the kids out quickly. So then, this would happen typically on a weekend. Case manager would come back, only to find out that the kid had been ripped away from the site, gone, shipped out, while the case manager was trying to do their due diligence and make sure that the child was protected. No, you took too long. Strike team comes in, makes sure that, the kid gets shipped out, and that's it. That's the end of it. This is not okay. This has to stop. This is our taxpayer dollars, are working, to fund, child slavery, and this is not okay. It just has to stop. It's shameful, and we're tired of it. We're just really tired of this. We want it to stop.
Yeah, no, and I can see that. I mean, it's a good cause, right? The danger is real, the threat is real, because you talked about them working in factories and things like that, and that's a concern, right? And for some of the older ones that are 15 to 17, they're probably, when they go back home, they're probably working by twice as hard somewhere else. But the threat of them ending up in a sex trafficking type situation, that's a real concern, right?
It is. They have found there's one girl, Project Veritas exposed it. There was one of the girls that was processed through the facility that was in sex trafficking. So it was one of those situations I told you about where they're a category 3 sponsor. They the girl said, in the interview, well, this lady said she was my aunt. I don't know. She said she knew me when I was a baby, but I don't remember her. And, she's forcing me to have sex with men at night in her house. They found this girl. Yeah, they found this girl.
What year was this? Just out of curiosity, do you know when this
Yeah,
was?
so the Project Veritas was 2022, I believe, or 2023 at the latest, because Tara testified in April of 2023. So Project Veritas came out with their expose exposing this, I believe, right before that. So it was 2022 or 2023 where Project Veritas exposed this one girl that they found in, I think it was the Houston, Texas area, who was being forced to have sex with men for money. So this poor child was being raped by a person who said that she was her aunt. And this is, this is not a one-off. And it's just so disgusting when I think about it, Raymond. It just breaks my heart that this continues to happen today.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is happening. This is happening in our country. For those who don't believe it, they can go and check out Project Veritas, the investigation with this one child, multiple children, but there is the one child who was caught in sex trafficking. But this is
Right.
not a one-off. These poor children went to people that they had no idea. We have a transportation whistleblower. His name is Carlos Arellano, and he explained how many of these children, when he would get them in the transportation department, they would say, "Please don't take me. I don't actually know this person. I was told, to tell them that I knew this person, but I don't really know who this is. I'm really scared." There were other children who would say, "I was separated from my sister. I don't know where she is. I can't find her," because they would end up in shelters. Like, so for the cases where, we couldn't fully vet, there's no real vetting, but we couldn't vet that, there was an actual relationship there. They would have us send these children to longer term shelters. Well, at the time we thought, okay, this is good, right? They're going to go to a longer term shelter. They're going to get the care that they need and the follow up. Well, no, because many of the shelters that we sent them to was an organization called Southwest Keys. Well, Southwest Keys is now being sued by the Department of Justice for raping the people in care were raping these children, and they were hiding it and they were covering for one another. So these staffers would take turns taking advantage of these children, raping these children as young as 5 years old. And that's where we were sending them to, places like Southwest Keys.
I've read about that a little bit. Can you tell us, is that an Southwest Keys? Is that an American organization? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, it's here in America. They are funded. If you go to their website, you can just go to Southwest Keys and you can see that they are directly funded by Health and Human Services. One of the questions on their website says, "How are we funded?" You click on it and it says that we are funded by Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement. Just Google it, Southwest Keys, find their website, and you can find it right there on the splash page. Like, if you go to like About Us, you can see right there that they are funded by Health and Human Services, and they've been given $4 billion, billion with a B, $4 billion since 2019 to house children.
Wow.
And this is over 29 sites, Texas, Arizona, and California. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. It's a money-making machine. It's getting these kids in, processing them, getting them out, getting them to these shelters, for people to take advantage of these children. It's a disgrace, and it continues.
Is anybody being held criminally liable or criminally accountable for the rapes of some of these children?
Yeah, just the individuals. But Southwest Keys as an organization should never be allowed to house children ever again. They should have their license taken away. They should be debarred. The government should never do business with them again. However, they're continuing to operate. They're just holding the individuals that they caught, because there's many more, but just the few individuals that they caught, they're going to hold them accountable. But Southwest Keys has a history of this. This is not the first time that they have been in the news because of child abuse and rape.
Wow. That's interesting. Shifting this back to a question that I asked earlier about government accountability, I'm curious about this. In your experience, right? And every state might be a little bit different, but do you find that it's easier or harder to hold government accountable at the state level versus the federal level?
Yeah, I don't know too much about the state level, right? I assume that would be the attorney generals of the state, right? That would really have to go after these guys. But my experience, is in the federal space, obviously. And I will say that I've never really dealt with anything as egregious as this, but this is, kind of as bad as it gets. and they're still continuing to operate as if nothing has happened. So yeah, accountability is very difficult at the federal level for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting, you know, what it reminds me of, and this is a little bit different, but it's still, in some ways, you'll see why I'm making the comparison. If you remember, many years back, the Catholic Church, you know, got in trouble for condoning, you know, hiding the fact that a lot of their, you know, their right,
Clergy.
their clergy, you know, were molesting boys and
Yep.
young girls, and I mean, there was thousands of cases, and they've been doing this for a long time, and it was almost orchestrated, right? And it was, and they protected each other and protected, you know, to keep that from coming out. When it finally did come out, then the Catholic Church stepped in to protect, right, these individuals, the ones who are at the higher levels, to protect them from being prosecuted and being held accountable, right? They
Yep.
were taken to the Vatican, and you never heard from them again, right? It's interesting. Yeah, it's not, I guess it's not just government, but it's definitely interesting that there's that pattern, right? Once you start, you know, going after people that are powerful, that are influential, that are, you know, then holding people accountable is so much harder.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And interesting you mentioned the Catholics. Yeah, unfortunately, and this is not a knock against Catholics, please. You know, I respect
Catholic.
every individual, but Catholic
Institution.
Charities was another place that these children were going to. And there were major complaints about, you know, some of the sites that Catholic Charities was sponsoring, you know, of children that wanted to get out of those facilities that couldn't.
Right. Was there any, besides them sponsoring children to get out of those facilities, was there anything else that they did that was inappropriate as far as
Yeah, no,
funneling into human trafficking or something?
not that I can speak of because it's secondhand knowledge, so it's nothing that I can personally attest to. But, you know, yes, I have, you know, secondhand knowledge from other folks that said, you know, that children, you know, wanted to get out of these facilities. They were blocked from even going, you know, to grandparents, you know, that were trying to get custody of them because, you know, they didn't have the right paper, the actual grandparent, right, didn't have the right paperwork. And so these children were basically being held against their will at some of these Catholic charity sites. So that's secondhand knowledge. That's from the transportation person that I talked to you about, Carlos Ariano, and he can talk to you about those cases. But I don't have firsthand knowledge of those.
Sure. And just to make clear, right, for any of our listeners, I wasn't referring to Catholics as people, right? The people that
Right.
we are neighbors and the people that we know, they didn't do this, right? We're talking
Of
about the
course.
institution, and
Yes.
it's usually the higher levels of the institution. I think it's important to make that distinction, right? It's almost like, if I can be very candid, so we're talking about, you know, I mean, holding government accountable, and there's some issues there, and some of the podcasts you know, that I do, and some of the content I create attacks certain practices or certain, you know, unethical individuals within an institution.
Yes.
But that's not necessarily an attack on the entire institution,
Of
or
course.
maybe everyone that's part of the institution, because there's quality individuals in a lot of these organizations,
Right.
right? So,
Right. The same way that I would consider myself, you know, doing a good job on behalf of the taxpayer, right? But not, you know, during the time I was with HHS, I'm trying to be, you know, a good steward of the taxpayers' money while I'm there. But, you know, HHS as a whole, you know, has some good people in it, right? But there was just a lot of corruption, right? And so, like you said, I'm sure it's the people at the top that are protected, right? That because there's only probably a few people that really know what's going on, what the actual intent is. Everyone below them, you know, is just, you know, it's system by design. They're just carrying out orders, you know, that they're getting, you know, from above. And in some cases, you know, it's just they can just plead ignorance. They just really don't know what's going on. They think they're just following, you know, a process that has been established for them. They don't ask questions, right? And they're trained not to. Like they're just trained to. They really weren't trained to do anything, right? These people, when they came into the facility, you know, I took it upon myself to try to help and train them because nobody got a flag, you know, like trafficking flag training. Nobody got, you know, training on how to, you know, talk to these children and to understand, you know, when there are red flags coming up, you know, for behavior and those kind of things. Like there was no training on this. So system by design, you hire a whole bunch of people, contractors, to come into a facility, and process these children that are not able to, or just don't know how to recognize, these kind of issues. And
Mhm.
so that's the sad part, is that this whole thing is system by design, but actually showing and proving this, is very difficult, right? If you haven't been there, if you didn't take photos or, take recordings of what was happening, inside, it's very hard to prove it. Myself and my counterpart here at Rodos, we were able to collect evidence, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, Raymond. There's
Sure.
so much more going on, underneath the surface, and amongst those, 300 plus case managers that were working, that we couldn't quite talk with every single one of them, and so every one of them would have, I'm sure, stories that they could share about just these suspicious things that were happening, but they don't know how to prove it, right?
Right, right. And then you said, they have gag orders that kind of prevent
Yeah.
them from being able to.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
they do.
In fact, one of the questions that I really wanted to talk to you about, because you mentioned this, right, in some of the information that you sent over to me in preparation for today. I think there was a gentleman that works with your organization that was fired. He was a whistleblower, and and maybe I'm misremembering. But I'd love to talk to you a little bit about just kind of in general. We talk about whistleblowers, and there's whistleblower statutes at state levels, federal levels. But they make it so difficult, right, for them to be able to do it. A lot of them end up getting fired, even though they're supposed to be protected. And then I know some personal stories of people locally here at the state level that have exposed government corruption, right, through using that whistleblower statute, and nothing comes of it, right? Or if something comes of it, it's just kind of just a slap on, in the hand. And but I'd love to have you, just kind of speak to that a little bit. What's been your experience with that? What's the solution potentially, if there is a solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think whistleblowers should be protected, obviously. But the problem is that, they'll dig up or try to find, some excuse for why they're going to fire you. And so it's the proof piece, right? It's proving intent, right? You can't prove that they're actually firing you for whistleblowing, even though, they came out and find, something else ridiculous, in the case of like what you were talking about, for Aaron Stevenson, it is a wrongful firing, right? But they said, well, you released evidence that they considered to be. I don't know that it was secret. I don't think it was secret, but that so they're like, well, we just can't trust you anymore. So they fire you, right, for that. Oh, we didn't fire you because you whistleblew. We're firing because we can't trust you anymore, right? So they find ways to fire you without really saying it's because you blew the whistle. They'll act like they're supportive, like, oh, we're happy to support whistleblowers and whatever. But the bottom line is we know why they're being fired, right? Every Health and Human Services employee that came forward as a whistleblower, was fired. Right, they lost their job. The reason that Tara and I have not is because we work for different agencies. We don't work directly for Health and Human Services. We were on loan to them. During the summer of 2021, we were on loan to them, and then we went back to our agencies, right? However, Tara, she was retaliated against because they, once she discovered the MS-13 case and started reporting on it, they found an excuse. They said that it was because she violated some code of conduct. And then they walked her off the site. They had her clear out her desk, walked her off the site. She wasn't fired by the government, but she was told that she couldn't stay and help Health and Human Services anymore. And so she went back to her home agency.
Wow.
So they find ways. They just find ways to get rid of you. They'll find other ways.
Right. It's interesting, and this is not exactly the same thing, but I just did a podcast with a gentleman that was at the Office of Inspector General, right? He was a special agent, a senior agent. And he was telling me about, and like I said, it's not exactly the same thing, but it reminds me of this a little bit, because he was talking about how they were able to successfully put together a case with solid evidence, 17 indictments that included, politicians, successful, business owners, and so on and so forth. And then right before, the prosecution, right, they indicted these individuals, but before I could ever get to trial, the prosecutor that was in charge of the indictments, that was in charge of prosecuting this case and getting the convictions, they looked for technicality, right, to fire him. Yep. They looked for a little technicality, right? What you're talking about, well, it's this or that, or because you lied on your resume, you said, I don't know. They looked for a technicality, they fired him, and that was the end of it. All of it disappeared.
Yep.
Years,
Yep.
years of
You just
work.
you just credit the whistleblower, get him out of there. Yep. It's done. At that point, it's done. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I asked him, I said, well, why didn't they just assign another prosecutor? Was that you know, the evidence is still there, the investigation is still solid. It was years of work that you and your team put into this. I said, no, that was it.
Nope. Nope.
That was it.
Sadly, they want to keep it quiet. Like, you know, they don't want it to come out. They don't want their agency discredited. They don't want to smear these people. You know, they want to keep the higher ups in power, right? I know we're going into the realm of speculation, but I mean, it's not speculation anymore, like when it's happened over and over and over again, right? So
Yeah.
Sadly, Raymond, it continues. Yeah.
Sure. If I could take us back to the previous conversation for just a moment, I'm curious about something. You'd mentioned the Catholic Church, right? Doing like they have a charity and they were looking at getting some of the children out of custody. And but I'm curious about something, because I remember when this was all happening, right? It was all over the news. And one of the things that was publicized all over the news was the fact that some of these children, or all of these children, were being housed in like dog kennels, concrete floors, with small little thin, you know, beds and stuff like that. And, you know, they weren't given blankets, they were given like aluminum foil to wrap themselves in, or something, right? Foil blankets. I'm just curious, has your group or organization helped with any of that to try to improve those conditions? Because that was one thing that, right, that there was a public outcry, you know, and probably on a more global level as well. Did you guys also get involved in any of that, trying to bring about some positive changes so that they were treated, while they were caged, right, they were treated a little more humanely?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about when they receive the children at Homeland Security, right? Like when the Border Patrol receives the kids. Yeah. So they're not in kennels or cages or anything like that. Like, you know, if you took a video, you would see that they're enclosures, like they're areas like I don't know, like a big playpen, I guess is the only way I could describe it, right? That houses all these children. But there's, of course, we would love for the best conditions, and they're only allowed to have them there, by the way, for 72 hours. Those children are not there more than 72 hours because by law, they have to be handed over to Health and Human Services within the 72-hour time frame from the time they encounter these children. So those conditions that you're seeing, that is very temporary. Like I said, 72 hours or less are those conditions. But with the foil blanket, you know, there's only so much resources that they can handle when there's a huge influx, when they're just coming over the border and they have to put these children into enclosures, because they're not really cages, they're enclosures, right? They're areas that are roped off, or not roped off, but glass, you know, and holding these children, and adults get held in the same type of facility as well. But it's to separate them so that you don't have children, you know, being taken advantage of by older, right? Because they separate them by age group, by gender, into these enclosures. And that's what has to happen. I mean, it's just, they can't handle the amount of people that are coming across the border. And so this is like the perfect storm, that this is what's happened, right? It's an emergency. And again, it's only for 72 hours. When these children arrive to the facilities that Health and Human Services or the shelters have, that's where they have, like, you know, a cot, a blanket, a toy. You know, it's very much like a camp. You know, they're eating, they're going in the lines, getting their, you know, cafeteria style food. You know, they have schooling, you know, they can play on the field. The facility itself is not bad, right? The facility that Health and Human Services provides is nice. It's like a camp, you know, kind of. So that's not bad. But the conditions you're talking about is just the initial 72 hours when they're trying to process the children in and then get them out to whatever, you know, HHS facility they can get them to.
Okay, that's good to know, because I did see the photos of and there are like dog kennels, but that's probably just temporary and it's just kind of a short, you know, period. So
Yeah.
that's good to know, because I remember that those images were like plastered all over, you know, online, right? But
Oh, dog kennels. You mean like fenced in areas?
yeah, like little
Yeah.
five by
Right.
five.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking dog kennel like a dog house. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, and with the
Yeah.
concrete floors, and you'd see the children like laying
Right.
on the concrete floors, you know, sleeping on the floor, with, you know, with their little foil blankets, right? But it sounds like that's just a temporary thing, right? That to be like a 3-day thing before they got
Tops.
taken.
Yeah. It's usually one day. A lot of times they process them in, they put them where they need to go.
Sure.
they get the buses and the buses take them right out, and the contractors are ready to make their money. So they move them out pretty quick. Sometimes they're there just one day, right?
Yeah.
They're ready to take them and ship them off as soon as Border Patrol can, figure out, where they need to send them to, they send them off. Yeah, that is very temporary. That is just an emergency holding area,
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad.
but the
Yeah.
media, takes the photos and elicits, pity, by posting those pictures everywhere. But that is a very temporary situation. Those kids are in and out, very quickly.
Okay, I'm glad we clarified that.
Yeah. People ask me about that all the time. Yeah, the kids in cages. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Do you believe that with all the social media and all the, the platforms that we have available to us now, right? It's not just websites. Do you believe that that makes it easier, right? To go back to the other conversation about government accountability and that type of thing. Do you think is it making it easier? Is that helping in a significant way? Or is it still just, is it not a game changer, right?
Social media itself.
All of it, right? Like the
Yeah.
podcasts right here, the YouTubes and all the videos and the Instagram,
Right.
everything.
Yeah, I will say that no, the social media, the YouTube, all of that, it is great to get the message out, right? So that we can let the American people, the world, know really what's happening here, right? So it's definitely a wonderful tool in that sense that we're able to, get the message out, right? The problem that comes into play is like the credibility. People are just like, oh, this is another crazy person, just getting on a show and trying to talk about who knows what, or they just want attention or whatever. Like so that's the issue, is that the country especially is so polarized right now, and they think it's either one way or the other, and it's like, no, we would love for this to just be, it's a nonpartisan issue, it's a humanitarian issue. We can all agree that we should love and care for children, right? And they should be treated with decency. We can all agree on that, right? But the problem is I really think it's a credibility thing. People don't know who to believe or what to believe anymore, because there's been, so much misinformation, disinformation, who knows, whatever's out there on both sides, right? And I'm not saying any one of them is perfect, but that's the issue, is that really, like, people don't know what's credible anymore and what's not. So in a sense, the social media is really great to get a message out there, but on the same token, that message is oftentimes not believed by the public because of all the confusion that exists out there, right? And that's the hard part. That's the hard part. But so I'd say it's effective at getting a message out. I don't know how effective it is at actually getting action or movement. And so we'll keep fighting for that, though, right? Because if we just give up and do nothing, then we're part of the problem. But we're going to continue fighting with every breath that we have to get justice for these children.
Right. You touched on something right now with your answer that I as an organization, right, one of the things that we're really, and we have some projects that we're doing, it's not just the podcast, but it's some other things that we're working on to try to alleviate, to help with, there's so many different ways of saying it, right? But this polarization that exists right nowadays. I'd love to get your opinion on, what do you think what are some steps that we can take towards, as a society or as an individual or as individuals, to try to bridge that gap, right? Because this polarization that exists right now, where people automatically they're quick to jump down somebody's throat, right? If they don't agree on one single point, it's either, you're either my friend or foe, right? So I'm wondering, in your opinion, it's not good for the nation. What's the solution? How do we dial that back a little bit?
That's a great question, Raymond. I don't know if I have a great answer for that, but at the end of the day, I think we're all human beings, and we all want goodness and good things. Like, we don't want, evilness to continue to be so pervasive in our country and be so divisive, But unfortunately, once Pandora's box is open, you kind of can't shut it. I know it sounds depressing, but social media and being able to be fed whatever you agree with, it polarizes you, right? Because you don't, the algorithms, they'll feed you what they think that you want to consume. And so because we have become consumers of this beast, right, on both sides, right, well, whichever one you feel is right or wrong, doesn't matter. They've made everything a political issue at this point. Social media really has made everything a political issue, and you're just fed what you like. And so it makes you feel all the more correct and just creates this divisiveness. I'm not telling you or your viewers anything they don't probably already know, but that's what it is, right? Is that social media has created this huge divisiveness between people, where before we could just have, before all of this technology, right? We could come together and have conversations and talk things out. And it feels like those days are gone. It feels like sometimes we'll have a win and sometimes we won't, right? Just depending upon, which way Congress votes or what president takes what executive action, right? But a lot of what we're doing, podcasting and talking, we're sharing awareness, but we're sharing awareness with those that are willing to believe it and consume it, right? And take action on it. For those who don't want to, like, there's no way to convince them. There's no way to convince them that, we're not crazy people or doing this. I can guarantee you I'm not doing, I gain nothing from this, right? I gain nothing from this. I do what compels me to keep doing this and to keep speaking out and to keep trying to get people to believe our message and act on it is purely for in the interest of the children, right? I still could lose my job. I still could lose my job, but the mission is so important that it doesn't matter, come what may, whatever the cost, whatever that ends up being, whatever it's been to this point, that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is to continue to fight and do the right thing, because guess what? One day I have to meet my maker and I have to look him face to face and I have to be able to say that I did something with the mission that you entrusted me with. And that's what compels me to keep moving forward. And I think that's what's going to compel, the good people, of this country and of the world, to do the right thing. Is, at the end of the day, all of this is going to fade away, right? And what's going to be left standing is between you and your maker, what you're going to say when you see him face to face, because that day is coming. And that's what compels me. And I know not everyone may believe that, but that is what fuels me to keep going, regardless of how hopeless this may seem. My hope is in God, so I'm going to continue pressing forward.
No, I love that. It's a powerful mission, and it's well said. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll transition again, Deborah, to us. Just towards the end of our podcast, I'd like to ask some questions of all of our guests. One of the questions is this: I'd love to know, what is it that you do every day that makes you happy?
Yeah. So I guess a couple of things. The joy, I really feel like, joy comes from the Lord. So, I get up every morning and read a message or I pray, read the Bible. And so that brings me joy every day. And I also, I take like breaks, walking. Just walking is good for me, just to clear the mind. And that brings me joy just to be out in nature. I really love that. So definitely, I guess it comes back to God and country. I didn't even mean to set it up that way, but it really is God and country. That makes me happy.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. And where do you see yourself in 10 years? 10 years from today, where do you see yourself?
Well, I'll say this, Raymond, maybe, just continuing to fight the good fight and, saving children in whatever way that I can, from who knows what it's going to look like 10 years from now. But I love serving my country. I took an oath to serve my country and I continue to do that. And so I will say, though, that because, this mission, it has such importance behind it and it's so precious because it's about these children. I don't exactly derive the same meaning that I used to, from my government career. I still want to, serve the taxpayer and, just be a good steward. However, I could see myself shifting into perhaps, some sort of work, anti-trafficking work, who knows, maybe I'll work with Homeland Security, 10 years from now, but my interest is definitely towards, protecting the innocent at this point. So definitely 10 years from now, it'll still be doing that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And final question, if today, Deborah, if today was your last day, what 3 things would you like people to know about who you are and what you stood for, generations into the future, right? Generations after you and I are long gone, what would you want them to remember? or know
Sure.
about you?
Yeah, so guess I'd like them to know first and foremost, that Jesus Christ is my savior, and he can be your savior too. That's first and foremost and the most important thing to me, and the most important mission that I think I can spread. Secondly, you can't save the world, but you can save the person right in front of you. So just take action locally to do what you can. And if everyone would do that, what an impact we could have on this world. And then thirdly is just to, love your family, hold on to your children, instill in them every good thing that you can, because, this world seeks to devour and take away all of those things that you hold dear and precious. And the way we're going to, just keep our country and keep our world, safe is by teaching the next generation to live and love in the same way that you did.
Beautiful. And Deborah, if people wanted to get a hold of you, or if they wanted to help out with your cause and support it, whether it's through their, their energy or through financially or any way, right? If they wanted to get a hold of you, how can they reach you?
Sure. So you can reach me on my my X account. So my handle is at Deb White 77. And so that's at DEB White, WHITE 77. So at Deb White 77. And that's on X, formerly known as Twitter. So that's one way you can reach me. And then just the ask again is just that you go to americasfuture.net and help to stop the shame, save these children, vote yay for CRA.
Beautiful. All right. Awesome. Well, Deborah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insight. It's been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Likewise, it's been such a pleasure for me, Raymond. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.